On Wednesday, the Russian president urged both the authorities in Kiev and anti-government protesters to take steps to de-escalate the crisis. And he said Russia has pulled its troops back from Ukraine's border. He's also urged anti-government activists in the east of Ukraine to postpone their planned vote on autonomy and to give negotiations a chance. He's also called on the interim leaders in Kiev to stop the military crackdown in the country's east. So the ballot papers for the upcoming referendum on Sunday look rather pretty simple, and here's one of them. And here's just one simple question: whether or not a voter supports autonomy in either Donetsk or Lugansk. And it's worth nothing. There's no option of deciding to join Russia here. Let's now bring in journalist John White. He's live in Edinburgh. Mr. John White, welcome to RT. So what do you make of the decision by the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Councils?
Well, I think it's a very brave decision. I think it reflects the fact that they have bled, that they have made great sacrifices, that they have lost loved ones and friends and comrades in the conflict with the Kiev military forces. And it's no surprise for all that. But it does place the Russian government in a rather delicate situation because it is obviously trying to de-escalate the crisis. The President Putin has been very consistent from the outset that he does not want to see the breakup of Ukraine. But obviously he cannot afford to abandon, and clearly he will not abandon, the people in southeast Ukraine who are struggling against this illegal and illegitimate regime in Kiev. But in his speech the other day, he did call for direct negotiations and direct talks between the anti-government protesters in eastern Ukraine and the interim regime or its representatives in Kiev. This is the only way forward. And the planned referendum that are taking place on May 11th in two of the self-proclaimed People's Republics in southeastern Ukraine, they do not necessarily forestall that possibility from happening. So I think that the people who have taken up arms to defend their rights against ultranationalists and avowed fascists in some cases, they are very, very courageous. So we need to see an end to the rhetoric coming from Kiev that they're terrorists, that they're illegitimate in some way. They've actually taken up arms in response to a coup that toppled a legitimate government.
Exactly, but so the referendum is back again. What kind of reaction do you expect from Kiev to this move then?
Well, Kiev, their reaction is written in the blood that they have already spilled in response to their writ being challenged. But, you know, Russia is the only major power involved in this crisis. It's taking active steps to de-escalate the crisis and the conflict. What's needed is similar measures from the EU and from Washington. William Hague recently was in Kiev making a speech supporting the interim regime in Kiev and denouncing Russia's role. That all has to end because just because President Putin at this stage is calling for the referendum to be put on hold and for a dialogue to take place, that doesn't mean that Russia will not take steps to intervene if the conflict increases and if military forces acting on behalf of the interim regime in Kiev continue to attack civilians in the way that they have been doing.
What about the West? Are they likely to recognize any results of the vote?
No, they can't afford to. They've already taken the path that these people are illegitimate and that this is part of a plot by Russia. One thing that can be refuted from this development is the idea that the anti-government protesters in southeastern Ukraine are acting at the behest of Moscow, that Russia is directing these events in southeastern Ukraine. That's nonsense. And that's proved by the fact that President Putin has called for the referendum to be cancelled and that the people on the ground are deciding to go ahead regardless. So the West is now being exposed as having played this game whereby it's trying to blame Russia for everything that's going on and deny the agency of people on the ground who live in southeastern Ukraine, who are exercising their will and who are acting to restore democratic rights that were violated by the coup in Kiev, which in effect rendered the Ukrainian constitution null and void. It's how we fill that void that is the key thing now.
The West been calling for Russia to take more action over the crisis, but it appears the anti-Kiev activists in the East aren't listening to Moscow. Who are Western countries likely to turn to next?
Well, they're going to continue to try and put pressure on Russia. They're talking about implementing more sanctions against the Russian government. But, you know, who can they turn to? I think they've already lost this in the court of world opinion. I think what they've done is they've led the people of Western Ukraine rather up a hill, promising them a new era of prosperity if they were to move into a Western orbit. And on the contrary, they've brought the country close to civil conflict. So we do need to hear some wise heads coming to the fore. Russia has come out with a very conciliatory statement, and we need to see that reciprocated. Otherwise, this conflict will not end, and we are still risking a very, very serious major conflagration taking place and spreading.
John White, live from Edinburgh. Mr. White, thank you very much indeed for your opinion.